measured all the way to client interactions, because we were finding that our sales force was out doing a great job creating demand, talking to clients, and generating demand for products that we couldn't build. That we, looking back through the supply chain, we didn't have the raw materials to build the products. So not only were we missing out on revenue opportunities, we were greatly upsetting our customers, and by convincing them they needed something, now they were convinced. They said, okay, I want it. And so we say, you can't have it. So we have better visibility now to be able to look back and see what can we manufacture, what's available that we can go promise to our clients. So I'm not going to read through all this, but again, very much metrics based, very focused on, when I say transformation, and building an organization around this.
Both financial and non-financial methods.
Yes. By the way, our chief procurement officer is now out of work. The office of the chief procurement officer is now in China, and this was not just symbolic, but partially symbolic. Last year or 2 years ago was moved to China because not only so much of what we're sourcing coming out of Asia, but to really focus more on, hey, we're not just operating out of New York solely. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the importance of metrics on your process innovation. Do you have similar metrics now for your R&D or your technology side? Okay, it's going to focus on the PC. How would that be developed today, and what sort of metrics would you use?
So how is R&D measured? I'm not close enough to give you a lot of detail, but I'll tell you what we've done there. Is that there's Gerstner implemented this. He said, it's great. And by the way, if you go look at the number of patents issued in the U.S. every year, the last number of years, IBM has far surpassed others. And I think Gerstner said, that's great, that's important, but it's not ringing the cash register. And so we've actually set up between the business consulting unit that I'm in and our research and development, we've set up kind of a hybrid organization. It's not so much a skunk works, but it's really an independent consulting unit where we're looking for what are assets that we have created or that we are creating inside of IBM research that we can go wrap some consulting around and go sell to customers. How can we get some of those into consulting engagements, as well as how can we get some of those into some of our product innovations faster? And so I know there are metrics around. I can't tell you what the metrics would be, but believe me, everything's measured.
But IBM Research as an entity exists still in the old days, and that's where the basic research is done.
Yeah, but basic research, if you go up to, and there are labs, again, this is not just up in New York. Our lab, Bell Labs had probably a little higher brand recognition, but IBM Labs, Bell is called Watson Labs, up in upstate New York, just outside of New York City. And then there are other labs around the world, in Japan, Israel, Germany, and there's actually a special supply chain lab that's been created in China. But very, very much metrics-driven, budget somewhere between $5 and $6 billion a year. So there's still a significant amount of money invested every year in basic research and development.
That promises my last question.
No, that's right.
Are these research labs run by mainframers?
I wouldn't think so. I think there's probably all kinds of stripes of folks in there, but I think these are most of the people that I've seen that at least are at the senior levels, and a couple that I've had contact are pretty much research folks. I mean, they have the academic credentials coming out of academia, but have got research credentials. We do in our supply chain practice that I'm a part of. Give you an example. We actually have an applied mathematics department with about 100 PhDs that are looking for 40 optimization problems to go solve. And I'm not doing them justice with what they do. But for example, we did some work for a small company called Boston Coach. They're headquartered up in New England, but they are a limousine coach service, and they actually have offices around the U.S. and around the world. But they dispatch you. You want a limo, you want a car service to pick you up from an airport, they'll dispatch a car. They were having problems with drivers having too much wait time. And flights get canceled, weather delays, things happen, and drivers were sitting, and they had a lot of unutilized resources out there. Their inventory was getting old, because it was sitting out there waiting idly, not building revenue. We actually did a small consulting project for them, utilized some of our team out of research, the applied math department, and with some of the algorithms they developed, and really helped them solve some of better optimize their assets, their drivers, and their time, building these fewer drivers. And so maybe one way to answer that. But I'll tell you, the mainframe is still it's been renamed. It's now called Z-Series, I think, but we've given letters to everything now. But the mainframe is still very viable system for many larger companies. So how are we organized today? You know, when I joined IBM 27 years ago, very product focused. There were 3 product divisions, and you know, you'd have some people that have some specialization in different offices. Maybe you have the banking guy or the government guy or the manufacturing gal. We go to market both in sales and consulting by industry. And so if you look at the verticals here, financial services, communications, distribution, industrial, mid-market is actually where I am. And I'm just going to pick on industrial. So within industrial, you have people that have expertise in automotive, expertise in electronics, expertise in aerospace and defense. And then on the horizontally, you'd see from a consulting standpoint, these are our consulting practices. So you'd have expertise around strategy, and let's just look at supply chain. So you have expertise in supply chain and industrial and the rest of these industry groupings. So the idea is that both from a sales standpoint, somebody walks in, and this is a challenge still, but organizationally, is to get our people to get out of the IT organization and go talk to the business people. Because I keep telling our salespeople that, you know, as wonderful as the IT folks are, they're not making the decisions that are really going to be game-changing for the organization. They're not making the decisions. They're key influencers, and they're very important, but they're not making the decisions typically around if they're going to buy SAP or buy Oracle. That's somewhere in the C-suite. And you need to have relationships with all of those folks. So what we did was, and in a slide later you'll see some of our acquisitions. This organization really came about a few years ago after we bought PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting. And 5 years ago, 5+ years ago, we bought PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting. This was after Enron, when the accounting firms were having divorced themselves of their consultancies, and so PricewaterhouseCoopers almost was bought by HP. They decided that didn't work out. They wanted to go public, so they were about to go public, and literally a few days before they were about to go public, with the name of a company called Monday, they were going to be called Monday. I'm sure where they got that. I'm sure a great marketing consultant came up with that, Randy, but IBM bought it, and so we've melded, you know, their organization with IBM, but really along this model. And they were, PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting and IBM were very similar in models in the way our consulting organizations were organized. Culturally, organizationally, you may find this interesting. The person running our business consulting unit still runs it. Jenny Rometti was a legacy IBMer. The leaders for each of the theaters or the geographies, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pac, and the Americas, all of those leaders, those 3 different leaders, came from PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting. And then as we looked at the various leaders for these industry sectors, and on the horizontal, the consulting practices, there was a blend. There was a very well orchestrated blend of both legacy IBM and legacy PricewaterhouseCoopers leadership.
Let me ask you, sorry, this is the last question. It's related to this, but the digression. And this question is to you as a member of the MBA board. And I'm reading from here: organizational change, supply chain management, human capital management, customer relationship management, financial management, services management. Why not a single of these are the titles? Why aren't they the title of your MBA courses? Why don't we have an MBA course called organizational change, supply chain management, human capital management, customer relationship management, financial management, services management? Because that is where the future of knowledge is. I'm just kind of
it's fine to be provocative, and I'll tell you where our supply chain practice, we've actually formed partnerships with 3 universities in the U.S. Michigan State, Arizona State and Penn State, because they have by name supply chain curriculums. Now, we also hire a lot from University of Tennessee, Georgia Tech, and some others, because they have,
Maryland is also good.
excuse me?
Maryland.
And there are a number of very good supply chain curriculums. We form specific relationships with 3 universities because they have by name those programs, and the expertise, obviously the expertise going with them. So, but
Before we move
yes.
off that question, I'd like to address that. Well, sometimes organizational change is very difficult and very hard, and there's a story about IBM, and in the early 90s, they had various change problems.
Are you talking about online education?
No, I was talking about organizational behavior, business communications. We still have titles and classes like that because organizational change is very difficult and very hard, and sometimes it happens slowly.
We know that. That's because arrogant professor who said, change will not come to us.
I prefer to be called narcissistic.
Yeah.
There's arrogance in academia. I wouldn't believe that. I wouldn't believe it. Only large organizations. But one of the things, if I look at some of the things that Gershman, I think, I don't know what he would say if he were standing in front of you, but I think some of the change that he brought about, and I see this systemically going through the organization, is really bringing about a solutions focus. I mean, again, as he said, the last thing somebody wants is somebody coming in and saying, okay, I have a manufacturing problem. Oh, well, then you need a mainframe model X, Y, and Z. Or they only said they don't need that. They don't want that. They don't buy that. And IBM's going to miss the boat if they continue doing that. So bring in industry expertise, partnering, bring in partnerships. Our idea of partnering before 94 was we had relationships with a number of people, organizations called business partners. You know many of these. You know work with these. These were basically hardware resellers. Terminology, some people call them value-added resellers. Some people call them VARs. And there are many companies that do very good businesses in that. And there are many companies that we have relationships with that really still do that. And that's what they're a channel for us. They're our primary channel in many cases for much of the hardware products that we sell. But partnerships with a number of different types of suppliers. So and I'll show a chart here in a minute, but we've done a very effective job in assembling a portfolio of software. We just spent $5 billion about 2 weeks ago with a B to buy a company called Cognos. I don't know if any of you know Cognos. They're a Canadian-based company. The tools they have would be something in an area called business intelligence. And some people may think that's an oxymoron, but we actually bought that company. We bought we've done like 60 acquisitions in the last 5 years, and most of those, the vast majority, have been software. The type of software that we have acquired has been what we would call, the industry would call, the middleware. We already have operating systems, we have databases, databases. Middleware is what we bought. We learned some painful lessons that there's certain types of business software that we have not been very effective with. So if you look at the business, I'll call it application software that runs a manufacturing company, or that runs the bank, or runs a university, we're not very effective. We lost a lot of money and learned that we just don't do that very well. So we have formed relationships with a number of called independent software vendors. Some of those are and there's been a lot of acquisitions within those ranks. The 2 major software companies we have relationships with are SAP out of Waldorf, Germany, and then Oracle out of California. And they bought a number of companies. You may have heard of companies called J.D. Edwards and PeopleSoft. Those have been bought up. And then there are a number of smaller ones that we have. So we actually have built, in these consulting practices that we have, for example, in supply chain management, we have several thousand people who do nothing but implement SAP software. And we couple that with organizational change, strategy and change type skills to implement that software. Because when companies typically implement software, there's business process change that needs to go along with that as well. We doing okay on time?
You're fine. I have a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
You've used the word solutions.
Okay.
I was in the software industry for a few years, and if you went to 100 software websites, they would all say they offer solutions. You know, they don't even name what they do anymore. They just say solutions.
Right.
And I don't know if IBM started that trend or just part of that trend, but how did they get from where they were to offering solutions? I mean, they weren't known for it, were they? And the
Software companies, you're talking about IBM. IBM?
Yeah. Well, IBM in particular, how did they get from what they did? I mean, how did they sell people on the idea that we now offer solutions?
Well, great question. What's your name?
Randy.
Randy. Candidly, when I go talk to a business person about IBM and what we do, and I say, you know, if I ask them the question, what do you think we do? What kind of a business do you think we're in? Oh, you make laptops, or you make the ThinkPad, or you make systems, you make computers. You know, so it's still a well-kept secret that we're quoting the solutions business. Our view of that, I mean, it's a solution is not one thing. A solution, in many cases, is going to be some part of technology. It could be that hardware. It could be some type of middleware. It could be some type of business software, maybe from an SAP or an Oracle, and it's the combination of those things applied to a particular business problem. That is a solution. Now, the term solution is a much overused term because most people will say whatever hammer they sell, whatever is a solution. It's and they're looking for a nail to go hit, and no matter what the problem is, it just so happens what they have to sell is the solution. And what we don't do very good at, honestly, with IBM, is often saying to somebody, we really don't have a good solution for you. What we're doing is we, in many cases in the consulting industry, you'll go see a client and you'll walk in with something that looks like this. And consultants have a bad reputation because they walk in with something like this, which is a blank sheet of paper, and say, I'm going to custom develop something for you. Now, that's consultant speak, consultant language for, I'm going to charge you a whole lot of money, and I'm never going to move out. I'm going to live with you forever. And you're going to love it because you're paying me all kinds of money. What we're doing, particularly in our mid-market practice. Now, mid-market where I am, that's where IBM has never played that well in the consulting business, the services business. Are companies that are probably $100 million in annual sales up to about $1.5 billion in annual sales. We are still some pretty good-sized companies in there. We are pre-packaging what we call solution bundles, to solve specific problems. And it's not going to be 100% fit, but say if you're a particular type of manufacturer, we have pre-packaged SAP applications and some Oracle applications with some different types of consulting. So instead of going in and saying, I'm going to implement an SAP system for you in 12 months, I can say in 12 weeks, I can have financials up and running for you, and it's going to be at this price. It's much more palatable. In some cases, in all cases, it may use either hardware, it may be a server to run it on, some consulting and training to go bundle that up, some other vendor software like an SAP or Oracle, maybe some assets that we've created out of IBM research that we bundle into this. So I think customers are very wary of the term solution, to be honest with you. Because
you don't have like anything for a buck money.
Exactly.
The software company is so desperate for money, it's like, we'll do anything.
Well, because I dealt with one of our software partners for a number of years, and software salespeople don't have the best reputation. Software salespeople can make incredible amounts of money. It is if you want to get into something in the technology area that's extremely lucrative, software sales is very lucrative. You can make a lot of money.
Why is that? Is because they have solutions looking for problems?
No, it's because
not the other way around.
It's because profit margins on software are so high, and if you're a good salesman, convince somebody that you need to buy this. very good commissions on the software price. And so many cases where software salespeople will sell you a product that maybe you don't need, or maybe it's not completely developed, and they'll make a lot of promises. And so software salespeople don't have a lot of credibility in the marketplace. Overall, that's a generalization. Yeah.
Since you are talking about jobs, and from a fresh new MBA, and you want to hire someone, what kind of the skills are you looking for?
Well, what I'd be looking for in consulting, well, it would vary somewhat if it's consulting, what I'm looking for here. Most of the people we hire in supply chain management, we have, you're looking for people who have had academic success, bare minimum 3.0.
What type of skills?
So the type of skills you're looking for people who have demonstrated analytic skills. So in many cases we're hiring engineering undergrads. A lot of supply chain programs at Michigan State, Penn State to some degree, the ones I'm most familiar with. The supply chain programs are a blend of industrial engineering programs and business school programs. Now, depending where you go and the politics of the university, the supply chain curriculum may be taught out of the business school or the engineering school, or they might be competing and have competing programs. But it's those combinations, very deep analytical skills typically. So if somebody's coming out with a pure business major that has no prior work experience, it's going to be very tough to get hired into my consulting practice. Question? Yes, sir.
I just have a question regarding this. How did IBM go from having every single one of these problems to being able to tell people how to fix it?
Okay. Good question. That's a good question. Part of it is the type of people that we were hiring over time has changed. Let me get into that a little bit, because the type of people we were hiring, I mean, you can't just go one day and have a room full of IBM salespeople who are out selling products, and then I wave the wand and say, okay, now go and solve these problems. That doesn't work.
You also bought a big consulting company.
Well, we spent $3.5 billion on PricewaterhouseCoopers, and so our mix of people that we have and the skills that they have has changed. Our hiring practices have changed. Now, I'll tell you, if you're looking for a sales position in IBM, in many cases, I'm not looking for somebody who has an engineering degree and deep supply chain expertise. I'm looking for someone who can go relate, have a business level conversation. Candidly, I think many people in this room could compete for those types of jobs. But it's not an overnight. Transition to be able to get to this. It's very specific set of hiring requirements that you have to start working towards to get there. And it is. I don't ever want to imply that Gerstner came in, waved his magic wand, retired, and all IBM's problems are solved. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's a continual process. So I will show you some of the metrics in contrast to the other slide that we had, where we have righted. The ship was righted. But if you have the opportunity to work for a publicly traded company, you'll learn something about the pressures of the quarter, actually the pressures of the month, but the pressures of the quarter. So we're a calendar year based company, so we're in our fourth quarter right now, and intense pressure on selling products, selling new consulting engagements, as well as delivering on those in a quality fashion. But you can see what we did, real dip in employees. As we started building back up, I can't tell you the mix, but the mix was markedly different of who we were hiring. When we hired PricewaterhouseCoopers, when we bought PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting, our own consulting ranks at the time were about 30,000 people. When we bought them, they had roughly 30,000 people. So we doubled overnight, and we already had a number of the skills you saw on the previous slide in the consulting unit. We still have a number of I call them brand people or hardware people that focus on selling software or focus on selling software hardware. So the new IBM, you know, one of the things that's happened, Lou retired a few years ago, and Sam Palmisano is our current CEO. He's the author of the one of the papers that you were given, and he is a lifelong IBMer. He ended up his trajectory of his career was Lou Gerstner discovered him and actually sent him to various hot spots that he wanted to grow, such as our IBM Global Services, getting our services business off the ground, and actually going other parts of the business. But Sam Palmisano is a 35-plus year IBMer. Started off as a salesman out of Baltimore, out of Washington, after he finished college. Does not have an MBA. Pretty bright guy, but again, he's a lifelong IBMer. So his job is to continue the transformation. So what we did, we remixed our business. Going back to an original question that was asked earlier in the day, you know, so what's the business? What have you done? Well, fundamentally, we changed. You know, we were not in if you talked to IBM before about service or services, we would have said service was very important. Like 1980, services is very, very important, meaning how I take care of my customer is very important. But the only services business that we were really in was I would sell you a maintenance contract on a piece of hardware that you owned, or would be a typewriter, a copier, or a mainframe computer. Services business is a professional service. So it's everything from outsourcing your IT organization. It's everything from building a building to house your data center or your computer room. It's now taking over. We will outsource some of your business processes. We developed an expertise in procurement services. We will actually take over and run your procurement services organization if you want us to do that. And there's some other functions, but procurement is actually one of the biggest ones. Also in services is the area that I'm in, which is business consulting, where we give advice, we implement software, and this is everything we do is really. I would say services is the tip of the arrow of the new IBM. Systems, plus we do financing with systems. That's our hardware. That hardware is only 23% of our business. By the way, services is over 50% of our profit. Actually, 50% of our revenue now, and not systems. Although most people would think IBM is a systems company, but we're still very focused on systems. Software, 40% of our pre-tax income, very profitable piece, where we will go in a consulting firm, we will go in and as we try to solve a problem. If a customer has chosen Microsoft as their platform of software, if they've chosen HP, if they've chosen Sun as hardware platforms, we work in those environments. If there's an opportunity to influence their decision, we candidly will influence them toward, IBM software or IBM partnered software products.
Charles, can I
Yes.
offer a comment?
Please.
It goes back to the question that was asked a while ago about being a solutions provider. I owned a couple of computer retail stores back in the late 1980s, and what I saw happening from the early 80s to the end of the 80s was this shift from just being able to make money selling hardware and a little bit of software to you couldn't make any money on the hardware, so the only way you could make money was on services and software. And so there was this because of the trend toward commoditization of hardware, or the perceptions of commoditization of hardware, coupled with an expanding pie. The number of organizations using information technology and the number of ways in which they were using it gave you an expanding pie. So you had those two things happening at once. A lot more applications of information technology and organizational competitive strategies, coupled with the perceptions of the commoditization of hardware, the shrinking margins on hardware, driving this move toward the solutions mentality and selling solutions, because you could make money in these two big slices of the pie that you couldn't make in the other slices.
What we've learned, and particularly in mid-market, we've been pioneering the last couple of years, is we can look at all the levers we can pull, and we want to, you want to sell and drive a lot of revenue, but you want it to be profitable. Particularly in the consulting business, I'm not paid to go sell an IBM server. for example. I mean, if I can influence it, I'll do that because my paycheck and my stock certificates still say IBM. They don't say IBM Business Consulting. They say IBM. But we prepackaged servers with SAP software or Oracle software that SAP has said, hey, IBM, we want to be a channel. We want you to be a channel for us. So we are a channel partner of SAP and Oracle. So in certain instances, certain cases, we can resell their software. They give us margin on that, and we package around that some of our consulting as well. And it's a very profitable deal for us. And the customers, particularly smaller customers, say, hey, I really want to do business with one person. I want the nice way to say is I want to do one-stop shopping. The not so nice way is I want one throat to choke if something happens here. But either way, it's a business we're knowingly getting in and building and hiring salespeople into IBM that have come from SAP or come from Oracle that really understand those industries and that software to go sell that whole bundle together. So again, changing mix. I don't have a slide with what it was before here, but it's certainly very much a change toward services and software.
I think the other thing that's really important to understand is the size of the hardware market today compared with the size of the hardware market because it's much larger.
Right.
So it's not only this changing mix, but it's the size
Expanding
of
of
the
the
market.
pie, absolutely. So if you look at, and the question was asked earlier, so globally, and we are globally integrated, some countries I would really submit that you ought to be watching. We call these, I don't know if it's just IBM has made up an acronym, and we love to make up acronyms, but or if this is more of a universal term, but the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, high growth rates in these countries, and not just for both internal consumption as well as where we and others are building operations in their significant capability. I mean, one of the attributes of a globally integrated enterprise is not that we're just moving operations to India per se because it's cheap labor. Because I'll tell you, the days of really cheap labor in India are changing because labor rates, as people want more benefits and cost rates go up, it's more expensive. But there's a high number of engineering grads and computer science grads in places like India and China and elsewhere. But if you look at our populations in the geographic regions and the revenue, we're still getting 45% of our revenue out of the Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Asia, EMEA as we call it, 35, and Asia 20, and those will continue. We're going to watch certainly Asia change over time. Those will always change over time. We had Sam Palmisano has an annual financial analyst meeting. Historically, if he's having a financial analyst meeting, where do you think he holds the meeting? China? Probably not China. It's usually somewhere around Wall Street, right? Or 590 Madison, where we happen to have an office and office space. He held it in India 2 years ago, and part of it was a message. I guess if you're really interested in following IBM, you're going to go a long way to see this hear this presentation. But there's a message of currently we have, I think, something 60,000 full-time IBM employees in India today, and we're continuing to hire. So we're shifting to more of this globally integrated model. We're not just going for places where we're looking. If you look at some of the attributes of a globally integrated model, one of the key attributes is skills. Where can you find the right skills for what you're looking for? And if you think it's going to be growing up, people thought just within terms of Mississippi. Well, if you think it's just in terms of just the United States, that's a pretty arrogant assumption because where all the skills are, because the skill pools are changing. And we built a supply chain lab that I mentioned in China, and a lot of skills in these other areas, and that's going to continue to increase.
When you're talking about the $150 billion opportunity by 2010, is that for BRIC countries alone, $150 billion?
Yes. Yeah. And so that's, and we're seeing opportunities. We're actually in Brazil. We actually have put some of our administrative functions internally and functions that work with clients, but managing administration and finance in Brazil, India. If you look at all those consulting practices that I showed you, everything from strategy change, supply chain, customer relationship management, all of those practices have representation in, I know, certainly in India and growing elsewhere. And it's not just because it's cheap, but it's really, that was initially why, but it's really that's where the skill tools are.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The type of teams they work on projects or whatever, different teams, and they are from all over the world. They are not in one country. For example, several people in India, several in there's the different race. How big are these teams?
How big are the teams?
Some idea.
The teams, depending, it depends. It's not like a consultant, it depends.
I just want some idea.
The projects that we do in mid-market, for example, can be anywhere from 1 or 2 people, depending if it's a strategy, type of an engagement where I'm helping you select a new software package for a mid-market company. It could be 1 or 2 people. It could be if it's implementing prepackaged SAP. We're implementing a prepackaged SAP project for a company, a distributor in Birmingham. They're about a $200 million distributor of construction supplies, and the team fluctuates over time, but it's about 8 to 10 people all the time. We did a project for a company in Memphis that's still going on, an SAP implementation, large international company. The project, I think, at its peak, probably had 250 or 300 people on the project team. So they can be quite sizable.
There was one article in the Harvard Business Review, latest issue from Europe. People in Europe, they wrote it. They were talking about usually 100 and above. I was surprised about it. That's the reason I asked.
Well, the market forces you to look for creative ways of how to running these projects, and we're using more and more resources from around the world. For example, I had dinner with our project team on this project in Birmingham, and to give you an example, there happened to be eight of us around the table having dinner. A couple had gone home early. Of that 8, 1 had just been with specific SAP skills. One guy had just been hired into IBM 2 weeks before, was moving to the U.S. from Mexico. 2 had flown into the U.S. from India 2 weeks previous to that, and were going to be here for the project. And then the rest were, I guess the balance were American U.S. nationals. So it depends. It depends. That number of 100 plus, that seems awfully high on average, but again.
But I said, I read it.
It's socialist countries. Europeans are socialists.
Also, when you look at this project in Memphis, and their CIO laid out that project a few years ago, it was a $600 million project.
Right.
And so you don't see very many of them.
No, you don't. You see fewer and fewer. Leading up to the year 2000, there was a phenomenon of Y2K, and everyone feared that the world was going to come to an end because because of the date, only two digits for the date.
This specific study was concentrating on several companies, a good number of companies in Europe.
Okay.
They were talking about recent trend
Yeah.
in project management, when they use the number of people from 80 up to 100 plus. I was surprised. I just didn't know that we didn't ask.
That's good. So, defining what IBM wants to be, going back to our history, Thomas J. Watson Jr., son of the founder and CEO during the mid-'60s, one of the guys I would contend to you was an innovator, literally bet the business on the System 360 mainframe. But he really, the business was developed on a core set of beliefs, which was the basis for our culture, the way we treat each other, the way as employees, the way we treat our customers, and really did not change for many years. When Sam Palmisano came on board, he started looking for ways. One of the areas he looked at was, what are our values? I mean, the values that we have in 2004 going forward? Are they the same values as we've shared before? What do you think? And instead of one person, one very strong business leader with last name Watson deciding these are our values and writing them down, started harnessing the technology. And we've used a technology, and we created a series of events called jams. Now, if you think of jams with like musicians, you get a group of people together, and you play some music, and you figure things out. You have a good time. If you think of jams in terms of corporate culture, well, you haven't really thought of it that much, but it was a way with technology, with our intranet, we're able to go and be provocative, throw out some provocative questions, and we've done this over time with different topics. Now, Values Jam, this was really about IBMers. So this was open to every IBM employee in the company, no matter what your title was. And by the way, when you have a jam, you can see who people are, but you don't have a title down there under their name. Everyone, it's one person, one vote. You can vote as often as you want. You can weigh in on any topic that you want. And it's somewhat like blogging or a wiki. It's where you can participate. And so we had quite a few participants. It was capped at 72 hours and around values. And really creating out of that came a piece of work, a paper that we wrote, our 3 values. We have dedication to client success in the work that we do with them. The innovation that we do, it should matter. And it shouldn't just matter to the IBM shareholders. And I can give you, actually there's a document there, if anybody wants that, I can get you a copy of that. But innovation that matters for our company as well as the world. There are a lot of, I don't know what our applied mathematicians are working on at the moment or on optimizing, but I have to believe that we're doing a fair amount of work around security, around issues that do matter to all of us world citizens, but also the final trust and personal responsibility in all the relationships, whether it's employee, manager, subordinate, whether it's IBMer to client, or any other relationship that we may have, core values that we have. And I think this is Sam talking to Harvard Business Review about why are values important? Why do we reestablish? And I think a key point that he makes here, no matter what you have on the organization chart, you can't really dictate. You can't have a management dictate. You have to literally lay out these values so everybody knows who you are, and then you have to, as he talks about in the global integrated enterprise, there has to be a level of trust amongst ourselves that we'll make good decisions, amongst our partners, the partners that we have, that we trade with and that we work with. So talking about just shifting some of the business model that we're in now, we've gotten out of a number of businesses. If you look down to item number 5, what a change from 1981 to 2005. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of, still within IBM, there's a lot of passion for a number of for those topics on the left. A number of people who have strong residual backgrounds and history with those organizations and have great passion. But we really decided that these were not core businesses for us. We've made some specific strategic acquisitions like PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers. All the rest of these really, maybe a couple of exceptions. Here's ISS is actually an internet security company out of Atlanta, but most of these are software-based. Most of these will be middleware-based, called middleware software. And getting us some new businesses. Lotus was one of the original ones. MRO was one last year. But again, software, that's where the margins.
And there's been a substantial amount of money spent here. I mean, these are not cheap acquisitions.
No, the most expensive one to date is Cognos. And then I know PwC, Cognos was $5 billion. PricewaterhouseCoopers was 3.5, and those were, I think, probably the bellwethers for those. But those not inconsequential. No, not at all. And another, as we've learned to do acquisitions, this is a competency that we've developed, and we're actually helping clients out of our strategy practice as they do acquisitions of different parts. There's the financial due diligence, but how do you integrate cultures? You know, how do you bring organizations together? What's the 100-day plan? What should the 100-day plan look like, and how do you go execute against that? So we learned that like you learn a lot of things. You don't learn it by doing it right the first time. You learn it by making mistakes. You learn it by hiring an organization and losing a lot of watching the intellectual property, the intellectual capital they have walk out the door because they're human beings. And so mostly now when we do acquisitions, it's around hard assets. So companies or organizations that have hard assets, typically such as software. So we are, and this is a quarter-to-quarter business. I'll tell you, it's but certainly from where we were in the middle '90s, when we were bleeding cash, we have become more of a higher performing enterprise. Our goal is to be innovative, but at the end of the day, our owners, the shareholders, want us to be returning more to them per share. Some of the ways we're using technology, and we've learned this ourselves, and we help clients with this, but some of the ways we use technology is this area called Think Place. So we actually have, I'm working on something with the MBA board, creating a community group with our alumni. How can we be more effective with our alumni to help you, who are current students, and as you become alumni, reach back to the university and also reach out to you. So there's a community called the Ole Miss MBA community, and I include current students as well as past students. There are many communities inside IBM. There are going to be communities of various types of consultants, people who sell certain types of mainframes, certain types of other hardware, people who have expertise in aerospace and defense industry or electronics industry. And so these community groups come together and they have tools, Think Place is one of them, where they can literally, whether they're in Brazil or they're in Birmingham or they're in Bangalore, they can share information and they create blogs and organize it in a way, and then it's searchable information to be able to use. But Think Place is something that we branded that we use internally. We've actually taken some of this technology and we actually will resell that at times. IBM will take positions on particular subjects such as genetics and come out and making statements, because this was a couple of years ago when concerned about privacy issues. Are companies going to be getting into, if we gather genetics information, is that going to be shared? And we come out and make public statements. Again, I think it's part of our culture and values of really being relevant to the world, and we'll take stands on certain policies.
So you will keep the data, but you will not use them.
I'm not sure if we're keeping it at all.
Because that says we will not use it.
No, it says we will not use it. So anything we gather like that, we're not going to use. Jams that we have, and just some of the examples of jams. I'm not going to read these to you, but the last one in 06 around innovation. But we've gone from doing jams where we involve just IBM employees, that will involve our customers, our clients, will involve business partners. So those people who resell IBM products, who are solution provider partners, can participate in these as well. I'm going to end on this slide here on globalization. Much is being written about globalization. We have the world is flat. If you made your way through the book, it's a pretty heavy book. You don't want to carry it around campus too much, but it's a lot of things that we've been living of a flat society, of a flat world. I think back to a conversation I had several years ago with my mother, who's now 81, and she said, and as a parent now, I look at it differently. She said, "Your world is so much different, it's so much bigger than my world ever was." And that's true. That's absolutely true. I've traveled places that she's never seen and will never see in person. I think about my kids who are in 8th grade and 5th grade and how big their world is going to be, and your kids and your families. The world is flat. I mean, we travel. Certainly, the globally integrated enterprise. I think a couple of the points that Sam made and Sam Palmisano made is that the globally integrated enterprise. Some of the key criteria are where are the skills. Not about cheap labor, but it's about where are the skills. Also, issues of of trust and accountability, issues of intellectual property. Over the last, I don't know, I think just the last few years, I forget the exact time span, 60,000 new manufacturing operations were developed and opened in China.
With foreign direct investment from 2000 to 2003.
2000 to 2003. There's a phenomenal interest in China. I've been to Shanghai twice. When you have a chance to go, I don't know if any of you had a chance to go already, you will have an opportunity to go various places in China, I'm sure. Maybe some of you will go to the Olympics this next year. Phenomenal place. Intellectual property is still a very real issue, and our customers we talk to, both small and large, still very concerned about intellectual property rights and how they're being recognized. And China is probably the marquee country where that's discussed. That's it. So trust and accountability with trading partners will be great. But, so I hope I've given you a glimpse today. I know we're running out of time. I hope I've given you a glimpse and not incremental change, but a sense of some of the significant transformational change that we've gone through as a business. Because for us, it was thrust upon us as a matter of survival. I can't speak for other companies. I've had 12 different jobs as I've worked at IBM. It was very painful. It was very necessary. Certainly, we had this guy named Gerstner who's been very successful in selling Oreos and Amex cards come in. We didn't know what it was because we sure had liked the good old days when things had been the way they were. But certainly, we couldn't go back. So it's I'll submit to you, whatever you do in the future, as you look for graduating and getting out of here, whatever organization you're part of, I always encourage you to seek wise counsel. Don't don't get this. We think oftentimes of diversity as a diversity of both the people we work with and diversity of thought. Don't just think of it as something that you're doing because you're required to. Surround yourself with people who are different than you are. Look for different points of view. Change is difficult. Have people around you who are going to be provocative and force you into places that maybe you don't want to go, but maybe places you need to go. It's hard, and it doesn't end. It doesn't stop. So, Mark, with that, I'll stop. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now, or I'll be hanging around for a little while later.
Well, Charles, we greatly appreciate your generosity and your time. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Awesome talk.